enough of an operational sense of your own government that you can get these policies implemented, because it seems like that was missing for both of them for very different reasons.
Well, you need to have a good sense of your own government to be able to talk about implementation. And if you contrast Bush 43 and Bush 41, Bush 41 had a very well organized domestic, not domestic, but American National Security Council. I mean, he was very organized. Many people argue that Bush 43 did not, to put it politely.
Yes,
politely. But I think more to the point is the lack of understanding of the rest of the world. There's a wonderful quote that I borrowed from Derek Chollet, who's now at the Pentagon, about the difference between George Shultz, who was Reagan's Secretary of State, and Condi Rice. And Derek says, George Shultz was once asked, what do you need to be a good Secretary of State? He says, the same skills you need as a gardener. Careful, patient tending of plants to make them grow. And Chollet says, Condi Rice thought that was inadequate. She wanted to be a landscape architect. She wanted to, and as in her words, she wanted to institute transformational diplomacy. Now, there are times when transformational diplomacy is necessary, but it's also true that when you look at foreign affairs, you have to understand two things. You have to understand the domestic politics and cultures of other countries, and then you have to understand how they interact as an international system. That's an enormous degree of complexity. And when you're thinking about things that are extremely complex and you don't know how they're going to turn out, maybe the first principle is the Hippocratic Oath, which is above all, do no harm. So before you rush in to try to transform the world, be fairly sure that you're not going to make the world worse. And I think you can make the argument that both Wilson and Bush 43 wanted to make improvements in the world, but they didn't know enough about the world to make it better, and they made it worse. The result of Wilson's efforts to create the League of Nations was that period of isolationism in the 20s and 30s in which the Americans withdrew too much from the rest of the world. And I think the results of Bush 43's efforts to transform Iraq was not to produce the Arab Spring, but essentially to create a situation where there was a strong rejection or resistance to the United States in much of the Muslim world. So sometimes